My parents told my brother, "We're putting the house in your name, so your brother can't claim any part of it." I was paying their medical bills after my father's stroke. I said nothing, but when they needed emergency surgery, 3 months later, their calls to me went unanswered. I never thought I'd be making one of these posts, but here I am. I've been sitting on this for months, trying to process everything. Fair warning, this is going to be long, and I'm still angry as I write this. It all started 6 months ago when my dad had a massive stroke. I rushed to the hospital and spent the next week barely leaving his side while my mom fell apart in the waiting room. My younger brother Louis showed up twice, once for an hour on the first day, and again a week later when Dad was stable. Some background: I'm 35, run my own business, and have always been the responsible son. Louis, 32, has bounced between jobs, borrowed money from our parents constantly, and somehow always managed to be their golden child despite his failures. Our dynamic has been this way since childhood. I achieved, he charmed. I accepted it, focused on building my life, and maintained what I thought was a decent relationship with everyone. When the hospital bills started coming in, it was immediately clear my parents couldn't afford them. Dad was retired with mediocre insurance, and the out-of-pocket costs were astronomical. Without hesitation, I stepped up. Over the next 3 months, I paid out $82,000 for his treatment, rehabilitation, and home care modification. I never expected to be paid back. They're my parents, and I was fortunate enough to have the means to help. The day everything changed was completely ordinary. I'd stopped by their house after work to drop off Dad's new medications and check on them. I heard them talking in the kitchen with Louis, which wasn't unusual. I was about to announce myself when I heard my name. "Pablo doesn't need to know yet," my mom was saying. "We'll tell him after everything is finalized." I froze in the hallway, keys still in hand. "You're sure about this?" Louis asked, sounding uncharacteristically concerned. "He's been paying all the medical bills." "That's different," Dad replied. His speech was still slightly slurred from the stroke. "This is about the family legacy. The house stays with you." My mother's voice lowered. "We're putting the house in your name so your brother can't claim any part of it. He's doing well for himself. He doesn't need this place." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The family home wasn't a mansion, but it was worth about $450,000 in today's market. Paid off decades ago. I never expected to inherit everything, but to be deliberately excluded while actively supporting them? Louis's response made it worse. "Well, if you're sure, I could definitely use the equity. Maya's been wanting to remodel our kitchen." I must have made a noise because they suddenly went quiet. I stepped into the kitchen doorway, and 3 heads turned toward me with varying expressions. Mom looked caught, Dad seemed defiant, and Louis had the decency to look slightly ashamed. "How long have you been standing there?" my mother asked. "Long enough," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "So the house is going exclusively to Louis?" The room was silent for what felt like forever. My father finally spoke. "You're successful, Pablo. You have your business and that nice condo downtown. Louis needs security for his future." I set the medication bag on the counter. "The $82,000 I've spent on your medical care in the last 3 months, was that factored into your equation of who needs what?" My mother flinched. "That's different. We never asked you to pay those bills." "No, you didn't. I offered because I care about you. Because that's what family does." Louis stood up. "Look, this isn't my idea. I told them we should split it." The way he couldn't meet my eyes told me he was lying. I'd seen that look since we were kids, whenever he broke something and blamed me, whenever he borrowed money with no intention of repaying it. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked. "After the paperwork was finished," my father admitted. "We didn't want a scene." I nodded slowly, something cold and hard forming in my chest. "I see." I left without another word, ignoring their calls as I walked to my car. The drive home was a blur. By the time I reached my condo, my shock had crystallized into rage so intense my hands were shaking as I poured myself a drink. Delilah, my girlfriend of 2 years, found me on the balcony an hour later, staring at nothing. She listened as I explained what happened, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger on my behalf. "What are you going to do?" she asked when I finished. It was a good question. My first instinct was to call and tell them I was done. No more money, no more support, no more relation. But something held me back. A lifetime of being the bigger person is hard to shake off in one night. "I need time to think," I said finally. Over the next week, I got calls from everyone. My mother left tearful voicemails about how I misunderstood. My father texted that I was overreacting. Louis sent a long message claiming he'd suggested splitting the house 50-50ths, but our parents insisted otherwise. I responded to none of them. Instead, I gathered documentation of every payment I'd made on their behalf. I consulted with my friend Messiah about my legal options. None, really. It was their house to do with as they pleased. I talked to my therapist, Paisley, about processing my anger and disappointment. 2 weeks after the kitchen incident, I finally answered a call from my mother. "We need to talk about this," she said immediately. "Your father is upset and it's not good for his recovery." The guilt trip, her favorite tactic. "I'm upset too," I replied simply. "Can you come over tomorrow? We should discuss this as a family." I agreed, though not for the reasons she hoped. The family meeting was exactly what I expected. They sat me down and explained their reasoning as if I were a child. Louis had children to think about. He doesn't. I was financially secure. They wanted to balance things out, because I'd always had an easier time. My father emphasized that it was their decision to make. My mother reminded me that family should come first. Louis mostly stared at the floor. When they finished, I spoke calmly. "You're right. It is your decision, just like it's my decision what I do with my money." I placed a folder on the coffee table. "This contains receipts for every medical expense I've covered, $82,657 to date. There are also estimates for the ongoing care Dad will need for at least the next year. Approximately $4,000 monthly for physical therapy, medication, and home nursing visits." I paused. "I won't be covering those costs anymore." The silence was deafening. "You can't be serious," my mother finally said. "This is healthcare we're talking about. Your father needs these treatments. I'm well aware. And you have a house with significant equity you can leverage." I looked directly at Louis. "Or maybe the new sole owner would like to step up." He paled visibly. "I can't afford that kind of money." "Neither can we," my father said, his voice rising. "You know our situation." I stood up. "I'm not cutting you off entirely. I'll help with the standard medication, but the specialized care, the therapy, the nurses, those are no longer my responsibility." "This is about the house," my mother accused. "This is about respect," I corrected her, "and recognizing that support goes both ways. You made your choice. I'm making mine." I left them sitting there, stunned. Over the next month, they called less frequently. I heard through mutual family friends that Louis had taken out a home equity loan, not for my father's care, but for a boat he'd been wanting. My parents started canceling therapy appointments they couldn't afford. I held firm. It wasn't easy. Decades of being the responsible one, the fixer, the provider, made every missed call feel like I was failing some essential test of character. But for once, I refused to cave. 3 months after discovering their betrayal, my phone lit up at 2 a.m. It was my mother, then my father, then Louis. Call after call, each followed by increasingly desperate voicemail. "Your father collapsed," my mother sobbed in the last one. "He needs emergency surgery. The doctors say he might not make it if they don't operate immediately. Please, Pablo, we need you. We can't afford this without you." I stared at my phone for a long time, their calls continuing to light up the screen in the darkness of my bedroom. I thought about everything that had happened, about the years of imbalance, about the deliberate decision to exclude me while accepting my financial support. I set the phone down on the nightstand and turned it face down. For the first time in my life, I didn't answer. Update. Thanks for all the comments and support on my last post. The responses were overwhelming. Everything from people calling me the asshole to others saying they'd have done worse in my position. I appreciate those who understood this wasn't just about money or property, but about years of unequal treatment culminating in the ultimate betrayal. It's been 2 weeks since I ignored those middle-of-the-night calls about my father's emergency. The aftermath has been complicated. That night, after silencing my phone, I didn't sleep. I sat on my balcony until sunrise, watching the city lights and replaying every memory of sacrifice I'd made for my family. The $82,000 in medical bills was just the latest in a lifetime of being taken for granted. I remembered co-signing Lewis's first car loan when he couldn't qualify on his own. He defaulted, tanking my credit score for years. I remembered lending my parents $20,000 for roof repairs that somehow was a gift, not a loan. By the time the work was completed, small betrayals that I'd brushed off because that's just how family is. Around 6 a.m., Delilah found me still sitting there. She didn't say anything, just brought me coffee and sat beside me. That simple act of understanding without judgment broke something inside me. I cried for the first time since this all began. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears of grief for the family I thought I had. "Whatever you decide," she said finally, "I'm with you." By morning, I had 16 more missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic texts. My mother claimed they needed $32,000 for emergency surgery that the insurance wouldn't fully cover. Louis sent a voice message practically begging, his voice uncharacteristically humble. Even Maya, Louis's wife, texted me directly for the first time ever. "Your father could die. How could you be so cruel?" I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I called my friend Messiah. He's handled my business legal matters for years, and while family law isn't his specialty, I needed advice from someone who understood my situation. We met for lunch, where I laid out everything that had happened. "Legally, they're within their rights to leave the house to whoever they want," he confirmed. "And legally, you're within your rights to stop supporting them financially." "What about morally?" I asked. He considered this. "Morality isn't my expertise, but if someone told me they were deliberately cutting me out while simultaneously accepting my financial support, I'd have a hard time continuing that support." I nodded. "I need to document everything." For the next week, I compiled a detailed record of every penny I'd contributed to my parents over the years. The medical bills were easy. I had digital receipts for everything. The older stuff required digging through bank statements and tax records. The final tally was staggering. Over $140,000 in the past decade alone, not counting smaller expenses or non-monetary support, like the countless hours spent driving them to appointments or handling home repairs. During this time, the calls continued, though less frantically. I learned through mutual connections that my father had survived his emergency surgery. Louis had somehow scraped together enough for the initial hospital costs, though I couldn't imagine how. My parents were both back home, recovering, but financially devastated. I still didn't call. 3 days later, I received a formal-looking envelope in the mail. Inside was a copy of the property deed for my parents' house, now solely in Louis's name. No note, no explanation, just the deed, as if to prove they'd gone through with it despite everything. The document was dated just 2 weeks after my father's stroke, while I was still paying for his initial hospitalization. The timing hit me like a punch to the gut. They hadn't just made this decision. They'd made it while actively accepting my financial support. The calculation, the coldness of it. I couldn't reconcile this with the parents I thought I knew. Through a property records search, I discovered something else. Louis had already taken out a $120,000 equity line of credit against the house. A mutual friend mentioned seeing Louis and Maya in a brand-new Range Rover. Another reported that they were planning a kitchen renovation. Not a penny appeared to have gone toward my father's medical needs. Paisley, my therapist, helped me process the anger that threatened to consume me. "You're mourning the family you thought you had," she explained during one session. "It's like a death, except what died was your perception, not the actual people." "Sometimes I wish I could just hate them completely," I admitted. "It would be easier." "The opposite of love isn't hate," she reminded me. "It's indifference. You're working toward indifference." She was right. The moments when I felt most at peace were when I could imagine my family as strangers whose problems had nothing to do with me. The trouble was, those moments rarely lasted. 5 weeks after ignoring their emergency calls, I ran into my mother at the grocery store. I'd been avoiding places I knew they frequented, But eventually, our paths were bound to cross in our mid-sized city. She looked smaller somehow, her usually perfect hair unkempt, dark circles under her eyes. She spotted me before I could duck away. "Pablo," she called, her voice cracking. "Please, we need to talk." I stood frozen in the produce section, a bag of apples in my hand. Part of me wanted to walk away. Another part needed to hear what she had to say. "Your father isn't doing well," she said, approaching cautiously as if I might bolt. "The surgery helped, but there were complications. We're drowning in medical debt." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, surprised by the genuine sympathy I felt despite everything. "We made a mistake," she continued, looking around as if embarrassed to be having this conversation by the organic vegetables. "About the house, we thought we were trying to be fair, but we were wrong." I waited, saying nothing. "Louis isn't helping," she admitted, her voice dropping. "He took out loans against the house, bought things for himself and Maya. Now he's saying we might need to sell it to cover Dad's care." There it was. The house they'd given him to secure his future was now being leveraged for their needs after all. Exactly what they'd wanted to avoid by not including me. "What do you want from me?" I asked quietly. "We need help," she said simply. "Financial help, yes, but also, we miss you. You were always the one who knew what to do." I nodded slowly. "I need time to think about this." "Your father's asking for you," she added, a tear slipping down her cheek. "He won't admit it, but he is." I left the store without buying anything, my mind racing. At home, I told Delilah about the encounter. "What are you thinking?" she asked, knowing me well enough to see I was conflicted. "Part of me wants to help. They're still my parents," I admitted. "But another part thinks this is exactly what needed to happen. They're facing the consequences of their choices." "What about Louis?" "That's the part that makes me angriest," I said. "They favored him his entire life, gave him the house to secure his future, and the moment they needed help, he leveraged it for his own benefit." Later that night, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Maya. I'm leaving Louis. Thought you should know he's selling your parents' house. They don't know yet." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to process this new information. Maya and Louis had always seemed perfectly matched in their materialism and self-interest. Her reaching out was unexpected, though I suspected it was more about hurting Louis than helping my parents. The next day, I drove past my parents' house on my way to work. There was no for sale sign yet, but I noticed Louis's new Range Rover in the driveway. Making a split-second decision, I pulled over and parked. Louis answered the door, surprise evident on his face. "Pablo, didn't expect to see you here. We need to talk," I said, walking past him into the house I'd grown up in. Nothing had changed except for a few new medical devices in the living room for my father. My parents were both there, my father in a recliner with an oxygen tank beside him, my mother sorting medications at the kitchen table. They looked up in shock when I entered. "Pablo," my father said, his voice weaker than I remembered. I nodded acknowledgement but turned to Louis. "I heard you're planning to sell the house." The color drained from his face. "Who told you that? Is it true?" My mother stood up. "Medications forgotten." "What is he talking about, Louis?" Louis looked trapped. "I've been talking to a realtor, yes, but only because we need money for Dad's care. You know that." "And the equity loan you took out?" I pressed. "The one that paid for your new car and kitchen remodel? Was that for Dad's care too?" The room fell silent. "You did what?" my father asked, struggling to sit up straighter. Louis stammered something about investments and temporary measures, but the truth was written on his face. He'd taken the house they'd given him and immediately started bleeding it dry for his own benefit. "Here's what's going to happen," I said calmly. "I've documented every penny I've contributed to this family over the past decade. It comes to over $140,000, not including the recent medical expenses." I placed a folder on the coffee table, the same one containing all my financial records. "I'm willing to help with Dad's medical expenses again," I continued, "but I have conditions." All three of them stared at me. "First, the house goes into a family trust, with all three of us as beneficiaries. Second, any equity loans are for medical expenses only, with full transparency. Third, Louis repays the money he's already taken out, or his share of the eventual sale will be reduced accordingly. You can't dictate terms about property that isn't yours, Louis snapped, finding his voice. You're right, I agreed. I can't, but I can decide whether to help with the hundreds of thousands in ongoing care that Dad will need. Your choice. I turned to leave, pausing at the door. You have until Friday to decide. If I don't hear from you by then, I'll assume you're declining my offer. As I walked to my car, my phone pinged with a voicemail notification from my mother's number. I didn't listen to it immediately. Instead, I drove to my office and stared at the phone for a long time before finally pressing play. Her voice was tearful, but determined. Pablo, please, your father's condition is worse than we've told you. The doctors are saying he needs another surgery next week. We can't afford it without selling the house. And if Louis is already planning to sell, please call us back. I know we hurt you, but he might not survive without this surgery. I set the phone down, a strange calm settling over me. For once, I wasn't torn about what to do next. I knew exactly how this would play out. And for the first time in months, I felt completely in control. The deadline I gave them is tomorrow. I haven't decided yet if I'll answer when they call. Update 2. Friday came and went without a word from my family. I wasn't surprised. Pride has always been my father's defining trait, even when it worked against his best interest. What did surprise me was the text I received from Louis Saturday morning. We need to talk. Just you and me. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, he was already there, looking haggard in a way I'd never seen before. His designer clothes were wrinkled, his usually perfect hair unwashed. The facade of success he'd maintained for years was cracking. Maya left me, he said without preamble, as I sat down. Took half our savings on the way out. I nodded but said nothing. His marital problems weren't my concern. Dad's surgery is scheduled for Tuesday, he continued, fidgeting with his coffee cup. The hospital wants $45,000 up front before they'll proceed. Insurance is covering part. But you spent the equity you took from the house? I finished for him. He looked away. I didn't think they'd need it so soon. I was going to pay it back. With what money, Louis? You've never held a job longer than 8 months. Something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe, or anger at being called out. That's not fair. Neither is taking the house our parents gave you and immediately using it to buy luxury items while they struggled with medical bills. He leaned forward. Look, I know I fucked up, but this isn't about me anymore. Dad might die without this surgery. So sell the house, I suggested calmly. I can't, he admitted, lowering his voice. The market's down, and with the equity loan, I'd barely break even, maybe even take a loss. I took a sip of my coffee, letting him stew in the consequences of his action. What does this have to do with me? I know what you must think of me, he said, but I'm asking, begging, for your help. Not for me, for Dad. And what about your offer? The conditions I set? He shifted uncomfortably. Dad says he won't agree to putting the house in a trust. Says it's an insult to his judgment. Of course, even facing death, my father couldn't admit he'd made a mistake. Then I can't help you, I said simply, standing up. Give my best to Mom and Dad. His face contorted with anger. So that's it? You're just going to let him die to prove a point? No, Louis. I'm letting him live with the consequences of his choices, just like I've had to do my entire life. The next day, Sunday, my mother showed up at my door unannounced. She looked terrible, like she'd aged a decade in a month. Your father is too proud to call you, she said, standing awkwardly in my entryway. But I'm not. We need your help. I invited her in, but remained standing. My conditions haven't changed. Can't you set aside this pettiness? Your father's life is at stake. Something inside me snapped. Pettiness? Is that what you call it when I expect basic fairness from my own family? We made a mistake about the house, she admitted. But this is life and death. Where was this concern when you were signing over the house to Louis? When you were deliberately excluding me while I paid thousands for Dad's care? She looked away. We thought we were trying to be fair. No, you were playing favorites like you always have. The difference is that this time, I'm not pretending it's okay. She started crying then, not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use to get her way throughout my childhood, but genuine, broken sobs. Despite everything, I felt a pang of empathy. I'll help on one condition, I said finally. The house gets transferred to me, not a trust, to me. Her head snapped up. What? The house goes in my name, and I'll cover Dad's surgery and ongoing care. But that's not fair to Louis. I laughed without humor. Now you're concerned about fairness? Louis took out $120,000 against the house and spent it on himself while Dad needed medical care. He forfeited any claim to fairness. Your father will never agree to that. Then he's chosen his pride over his life. That's his right. She left shortly after, saying she needed to talk to my father. I spent the rest of the day with Delilah, trying to distract myself from the situation. We went hiking, had dinner at our favorite restaurant, watched a movie. Normal things that felt surreal against the backdrop of family drama. Monday morning my phone rang. It was my father. Your mother told me your demand, he said, his voice weaker than I remembered, but still carrying that note of authority he'd wielded my entire life. It's not a demand, it's a condition. You would blackmail your own father? Is that how you see it? Interesting that when I ask for the same thing you freely gave Louis, it's blackmail. Silence stretched between us. The surgery is tomorrow, he said finally. I'm aware. If I agree to this extortion, what guarantee do I have that you'll take care of us? The same guarantee I had when I paid $82,000 for your care while you were secretly signing the house over to Louis? None. The difference is I actually follow through on my promises. Another long pause. Fine. The house goes to you. But I want it in writing that your mother and I can live there until we die. I'll have papers drawn up today. Once they're signed and filed, I'll pay for the surgery. True to my word, I had Messiah prepare the documents immediately. By that afternoon, I was sitting in my parents' living room while they signed away the house they'd given to Louis just months earlier. Louis wasn't present. My mother said he couldn't bear to be there. As soon as the papers were signed, I made the payment to the hospital directly. I'm not a monster. I never intended to let my father die, but I also wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. The surgery went well. I visited my father in the hospital afterward, though our conversation was stilted. My mother hovered anxiously, trying to smooth over the tension with fake cheerfulness. Louis never showed up during my visit. 2 weeks later, I received a frantic call from my mother. Louis is trying to sell the house. He has a realtor here right now. I drove over immediately. Sure enough, there was a real estate agent in the living room, looking confused as my mother tried to explain that Louis no longer owned the house. My name is Pablo, I said, extending my hand to the agent. I'm the legal owner of this property. I have the documentation if you'd like to see it. The agent looked between us. Mr. Louis assured me he had full ownership. I showed her the deed with my name on it. She apologized for the confusion and left quickly. Louis emerged from the back bedroom only after she was gone. You can't do this, he spat. This was supposed to be my inheritance. It was, I agreed, until you proved you couldn't be trusted with it. Where am I supposed to live now? Maya took the condo in the divorce. That sounds like a problem for someone who recently had $120,000 to spend on cars and renovations. The look of hatred on his face should have bothered me, but I felt nothing. The love and loyalty I'd felt for my brother had been steadily eroded by years of selfishness, culminating in this final betrayal. You need to find somewhere else to live, I told him calmly. Mom and Dad can stay as long as they need to, but you're out by the end of the month. He moved out 3 days later, leaving behind a mess for our parents to clean up. I heard through mutual friends that he was couch surfing, unable to afford rent in our city's expensive market. Maya had apparently taken him for everything in their divorce, having documented his financial irresponsibility with the house. My relationship with my parents remains complicated. I pay for my father's care directly to providers, never giving cash to my parents. They're grateful for the help, but resentful of the loss of control. My mother tries to maintain a normal relationship, inviting me for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. I attend occasionally, but the easy comfort of family has been permanently damaged. Louis has tried to reconcile several times, always when he needs money. I decline politely, but firmly. The last time he called, he admitted he was facing bankruptcy and asked if I'd consider giving him his portion of the house's value. I reminded him that he'd already taken his portion, $120,000 that he'd squandered. As for me, I'm doing well. Delilah moved in 6 months ago. We're talking about marriage, maybe kids someday. I've expanded my business, hired 2 new employees. Life goes on. Sometimes when I drive past the family home, I feel a twinge of something, not regret exactly, but awareness of what was lost. Not the house itself, but the illusion of family that I'd clung to for so long. My father's health has stabilized, though he'll never fully recover. My mother takes care of him with the help of nurses I pay for. Louis has moved to another state, starting over with some woman he met online. I wish him well from a distance. People ask if I'm happy with how things turned out. Happy isn't the right word. Satisfied, maybe. I finally stopped allowing myself to be used by people who never appreciated my sacrifices. I set boundaries and held firm when they were tested. The house sits in my name now, a tangible reminder that sometimes justice comes only when you demand it. I don't plan to sell it. It's worth more as a symbol than as cash in the bank. Perhaps someday I'll raise my own children there, teaching them the value of fairness and consistency that my parents never understood. Until then, I'll continue paying the bills, visiting occasionally, and maintaining the polite distance that now defines our family. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. It took losing nearly everything to realize my worth, but now that I have, I won't forget it again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't some elaborate scheme. It's simply holding people accountable for their actions and refusing to be manipulated any longer. In the end, I didn't have to destroy my family. They did that themselves. I just stopped cleaning up the mess.